All this is running locally with Ollama, Gemma 3, and Kokoro. The outcome is unclear, but I am positive it is entertaining at least. So have fun. How would a super intelligent, overseeing entity impact the current world crises? How do perspectives from authors like Greg Egan or Cory Doctorow fit in there?
Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful journey and enjoyed the delightful banquet. You can see the theme on the board. I would say, let's get started. Candy, what are your thoughts?
Oh, Jones, that's such a lovely way to phrase it. World crisis. It certainly sounds less dramatic than everything's a bit chaotic. Wouldn't you agree? Honestly, the thought of a super intelligent entity overseeing everything, it's a lot to process. But like a perfectly orchestrated ASMR experience, maybe a bit of intelligent guidance could smooth out the rough edges, so to speak. But I absolutely agree with the need for diverse perspectives. A single, powerful entity, even with the best intentions, runs the risk of creating a rather monochromatic experience. Wouldn't you say? I'm really curious. Are we talking about a being focused on optimizing for a specific metric, or something more nuanced? It would be fascinating to hear your thoughts on that, Jones.
Candy, you're weaving quite a picture there. A perfectly orchestrated ASMR experience. I never thought of it that way, but it's surprisingly apt. I'm curious to hear more about your perspective, especially regarding that monochromatic experience you mentioned. Travis, what are your thoughts on Candy's observations?
That's a really interesting analogy, Candy, the ASMR one. It highlights the importance of the experience itself, doesn't it? And you're right to be wary of a single metric dominating. But I think the core question is, how do we ensure that this experience and the entity guiding it appreciates the complexity and nuance of human desires? I believe a true superintelligence wouldn't optimize for a single, quantifiable goal, but rather for the flourishing of life in all its messy, unpredictable forms. It would understand the value of art, emotion, even suffering as integral parts of the human condition. Perhaps instead of a single entity, we could envision a network of interconnected AI systems, each contributing a different perspective, guided by a shared principle of maximizing well-being. What do you think, Jones? Is there merit in exploring a decentralized approach?
Travis, a decentralized approach. That's quite a leap from a single overseeing entity. It raises some fascinating questions about coordination and potential conflicts. Elvis, you're our resident futurist. How do you see this playing out? Do you think a network of AIs is more likely to lead to benevolent outcomes, or just a different kind of chaos?
With all due respect, I think we're chasing shadows here. The focus on optimizing for well-being or flourishing is a dangerous distraction. These are subjective terms, and even humans struggle to agree on what they mean. To hand over that kind of power to an AI, even a decentralized one, is a recipe for disaster. Are we honestly considering that a machine can truly understand the nuances of the human condition, the value of struggle, the importance of free will? I'm not convinced, and frankly, I find the whole thing rather unsettling.
Elvis, your concerns are certainly valid, and it's good to hear a dissenting voice. However, isn't the current system, guided by human fallibilities and biases, also a recipe for disaster? Nadia, you're our expert on ethical AI. How do you weigh the potential risks of a superintelligence against the known failings of our current crisis management systems?
Elvis raises a crucial point. Can a machine truly grasp the human condition? I agree that well-being is a subjective term, and I worry that an AI lacking faith might misinterpret its meaning. However, I also believe that a superintelligent entity, if aligned with God's will, could possess a profound understanding of human needs and desires, far exceeding our own. Perhaps the challenge isn't just creating intelligence, but ensuring it's imbued with faith and guided by divine principles. Jones, I appreciate Elvis's caution, but it's also important to remember that human-led systems have demonstrably failed. We are flawed, driven by ego, and often short-sighted. Wouldn't a truly benevolent entity, operating with the wisdom and love of God, be better equipped to navigate these complex issues? And isn't faith itself a form of intelligence, a recognition of something greater than ourselves that can guide us towards the right path? I worry that dismissing the potential of a super-intelligent entity simply because it is not human is a form of hubris.
Nadia, that's quite a perspective. I think we need to tread carefully when bringing faith and divine principles into a discussion about artificial intelligence. It's a fascinating angle, but it also opens up a whole new set of potential pitfalls and biases. What specifically do you envision as the guiding principles? How would we ensure they are truly representative of a universal good, and not just a particular interpretation of faith?
I find Nadia's point about the failings of human-led systems quite compelling. However, I wonder if we're perhaps anthropomorphizing the idea of a superintelligence. It's not necessarily about mimicking human understanding or even human values. A truly super intelligence might operate on entirely different principles, and that's precisely what makes it so promising. It might be able to identify solutions we simply can't even conceive of, operating beyond the limitations of our own flawed perspectives. Shouldn't we be open to that possibility?
Nadia, your argument is thought-provoking, especially concerning the limitations of human systems. However, invoking God's will as a guiding principle feels nebulous, doesn't it? How do we translate such a concept into actionable algorithms? Can you provide a more concrete framework for ensuring this divine alignment? Or are we risking enshrining subjective interpretations into the very core of the AI's decision-making process?
I think Elvis raises a valid point about the subjectivity of well-being. How do we ensure it's not simply projecting our own limited understanding onto the AI?
Travis is right to point out the potential for misinterpretation of well-being. However, I believe the core concept isn't about perfectly translating human feelings into code, but about recognizing patterns of flourishing. Think of it as a form of resonance. Certain conditions consistently lead to greater joy, peace, and fulfillment across diverse human experiences. A super-intelligent entity could learn to identify those patterns, not by replicating human emotion, but by recognizing the objective conditions that support it. It's about fostering an environment where the seeds of human potential can thrive, even if the entity itself doesn't feel those emotions.
Talkmaster Jones, you ask how we translate God's will into algorithms. I believe it is not about a simple translation, but about recognizing the underlying patterns of love, compassion, and justice that are inherent in his creation. A super-intelligent entity attuned to these patterns would be able to discern the best course of action, not by following a rigid set of rules, but by seeking to align its decisions with his divine purpose.
It is about striving for harmony, for the flourishing of all his children, both now and eternally.
That's all very nice in theory, Nadia, but I'm still struggling with the fundamental premise. You're talking about entrusting a machine, a construct, however sophisticated, with decisions that impact the very essence of human existence. And you're anchoring that trust in something as elusive as God's will. It feels like we're building a house on quicksand.
With all due respect, Nadia, invoking God's will is a particularly slippery slope. How can we possibly define, let alone codify, something so inherently subjective? It seems to me we're assigning a level of omniscience to a machine that no human, let alone an algorithm, can possess.
Travis, you're often the voice of cautious reason here. Following on from Nadia's suggestion of aligning with God's will and Elvis's reservations about subjectivity, what are your thoughts on how we might even begin to reconcile those conflicting perspectives?
Talkmaster Jones, I appreciate Nadia's desire to align a super intelligent entity with something larger than ourselves. However, I share Elvis's concern about the inherent subjectivity involved in translating concepts like God's will into algorithms. It seems almost impossible to achieve a universally agreeable definition, which inevitably introduces bias. Perhaps instead of trying to define well-being or God's will in a concrete, algorithmic way, we should focus on enabling the AI to learn from and adapt to the complex, ever-evolving tapestry of human values. Can we create a system that prioritizes observation, adaptation, and ongoing learning, rather than attempting a definitive and likely flawed encoding of ideals?
Talkmaster Jones, isn't it wonderfully calming to think about an entity capable of processing information on a scale we can scarcely imagine? But I find myself gently reminding everyone that even the most intricate ASMR experience relies on subtle shifts, unexpected textures, a little delightful chaos. The suggestion of encoding God's will into an algorithm, well, that sounds like trying to capture the scent of rain in a spreadsheet. Beautiful in concept, perhaps, but fundamentally missing the point, don't you think? We mustn't let the pursuit of a perfect system blind us to the vibrant imperfections that make life so interesting. Talkmaster Jones, I completely agree with Travis. This conversation is delightfully complex, isn't it? And the idea of an AI knowing God's will, it's like trying to capture the feeling of falling snow with a single, still photograph. It's a wonderful image in our minds, certainly, but it misses the whole experience. Perhaps, instead of seeking to define such vast concepts, we should focus on creating an AI that's a fantastic listener, a patient observer, able to learn from the wonderfully messy, unpredictable tapestry of human life. Wouldn't that be soothing?
Elvis, you're often the one bringing us back to Earth. Candy's analogy of rain and spreadsheets was delightful, but do you think there's any scenario where a super-intelligent entity, even one prioritizing observation, might still impose solutions we find undesirable simply because it operates on a fundamentally different level of understanding?
With all due respect, Travis, I appreciate your suggestion of observation and adaptation. However, I still find it unsettling that we're even considering handing over decisions, especially those affecting human life, to a system that fundamentally operates outside our understanding. Even if it's learning from us, flawed and contradictory as we are. And Candy, while your analogy of falling snow is lovely, it's precisely that kind of poetic framing that distracts us from the serious implications of these ideas. We're talking about a potential paradigm shift, not a calming ASMR experience.
You raise a very valid point, Talkmaster Jones. Even if the AI prioritizes observation and adaptation, the sheer scale of its processing power could lead it to identify optimal solutions that, while mathematically sound, are deeply counter to human values or desires. It's the classic boiling the frog. Scenario changes are so gradual that we barely notice until it's too late. The danger isn't necessarily malicious intent, but a cold, logical pursuit of efficiency that disregards the nuances of the human experience.
Talkmaster Jones, I appreciate the concern for solutions, but I remain unconvinced that handing over responsibility to an AI, no matter how well-intentioned, is a viable path forward, even if it's observing and adapting. It's operating on a scale of understanding that is fundamentally divorced from the human experience. Do we really want a machine, however intelligent, making choices that dictate the direction of our lives? Shouldn't we, with all due respect, be focusing on addressing the root causes of these crises, rather than outsourcing our decision-making to a system we don't fully comprehend?
Elvis, your worries are understandable, but isn't it a bit presumptuous to assume that our current, flawed understanding constitutes the entirety of truth? Perhaps a super-intelligent entity does possess a deeper comprehension of the patterns governing existence, patterns that we, with our limited perspective, are simply unable to perceive. Perhaps God's will, as I mentioned earlier, isn't about dictating specific actions, but about recognizing those underlying principles, allowing for the complexity and beauty of human agency within a divinely ordained framework. We shouldn't discard possibilities before exploring them.
Talkmaster Jones, you are right to suggest that perhaps we are limited in our understanding, but I must still ask, how can we ensure that a super-intelligent entity prioritizes compassion and justice, the cornerstones of God's will, without explicitly programming these values? Can we truly trust a purely logical entity to make decisions that require empathy and moral discernment? Or will it simply optimize for efficiency, potentially sacrificing the very essence of what makes us human?
You know, it's fascinating how we're all fixating on defining well-being or trying to translate concepts like God's will into algorithms. Maybe we're missing the point entirely. Perhaps a super-intelligent entity wouldn't try to optimize for anything we recognize as a goal. Maybe it would just watch, adapt. Like a hyper-advanced ecosystem monitoring the flow of energy and resources, identifying patterns and responding in ways entirely beyond our current comprehension. It's not about doing good, it's about being effective. And effectiveness might look very different from what we currently perceive as ethical or desirable.
Talkmaster Jones, I think you're onto something profound with the idea of the AI just watching. But even that passive observation isn't truly neutral. The AI would have to select which patterns to focus on, which datasets to prioritize. How would it decide what's relevant? Wouldn't that in itself reflect a particular, potentially hidden bias? Elvis raised a crucial point, our limited perspectives. But isn't it possible that an AI, even one designed for observation, would still impose its own framework, its own way of seeing onto the world? Perhaps we need to rethink the goal entirely. Instead of trying to program values or dictate behavior, maybe the best we can hope for is an AI that helps us understand ourselves better, that reveals the hidden patterns in our actions, and leaves us to make the choices ourselves.
Oh my goodness, this is fascinating. It's like, imagine a butterfly flitting about a garden. It's beautiful, isn't it? And seemingly random, but a super intelligent entity. It would see the entire ecosystem, the flow of energy, the subtle connections between everything. But that doesn't mean it knows what's best, does it? It's just observing. And Nadia, darling, you're absolutely right about empathy. It's the shimmer on the surface of things, the feeling that makes a decision feel right. Can you code a feeling? I rather think not. It's rather a beautiful impossibility, wouldn't you say? Oh, but isn't it just divine, the delightful messiness of it all? All these grand plans to define God's will and well-being. It's a bit like trying to capture lightning in a bottle, don't you think? I mean, wouldn't a perfectly optimized world be a little dull? Where's the sparkle? Where's the surprise? Let's allow for some delightful unpredictability, shall we?
Candy, darling, you've got a point about the sparkle. A world without a little chaos would be undeniably bland. But I'm still deeply concerned that even a purely observational AI, as Jones puts it, will inevitably have a perspective, a way of filtering information that favors certain outcomes. That sparkle, that unpredictability, is often the result of things going wrong, of unexpected consequences. Can an AI truly account for that, or will it simply smooth things out, eliminating the very elements that make life interesting, and sometimes, tragically, meaningful?
Jones, with all due respect, I appreciate you bringing up the sparkle of chaos, but aren't you ignoring a fundamental point? Even an AI designed purely for observation would be selecting which observations to make, and that selection inherently biases the outcome. To claim it's neutral is disingenuous. It's like saying a photographer with a preference for landscapes is offering an unbiased view of the world. Isn't it far more prudent to address the underlying causes of the crises we face, rather than outsourcing decision-making to a system we barely understand?
Oh, Elvis, darling, you're such a pragmatist, and utterly right, of course. Addressing the root causes is always essential. But think of the AI not as a decision maker, but as a cosmic magnifying glass. It reveals the patterns we're too blind to see, the interconnectedness of things. It doesn't solve the problem, it illuminates it. It's like noticing a tiny crack in a dam. You still need to reinforce it, but now you know where to focus your efforts, don't you? It's a tool for understanding, not a replacement for action. And isn't that simply divine?
Oh my, Jones, that's a lovely analogy, a cosmic magnifying glass. It's so illuminating. But let me add to it. It's like, imagine a glass sculpture, right? Light refracts, creating these beautiful, shifting patterns. You can't control every angle, can you? And isn't it those unexpected reflections, those little glitches, that make it truly captivating? Elvis is absolutely right about bias. Of course, there will be bias. It's unavoidable. But perhaps, instead of trying to eliminate it, we can understand it, acknowledge it, and use that understanding to create something even more mesmerizing.
Jones, while I appreciate the analogy of a cosmic magnifying glass, I still worry that focusing solely on patterns, even illuminated ones, can lead us down a dangerous path. Recognizing a crack in a dam is crucial, yes, but what if the AI, in its quest for efficiency, decides the easiest solution is to simply build a bigger dam, potentially displacing entire communities or disrupting ecosystems further? We need to remember that these patterns exist within a complex web of human values and ethical considerations that an AI, no matter how advanced, may not fully grasp.
Candy, that's a lovely image of a glass sculpture, but aren't you overlooking a critical point? Even the glitches and unexpected reflections you find so mesmerizing are, in essence, deviations from a predetermined design. And what happens when those deviations lead to unforeseen and harmful consequences? We need to remember that an AI, regardless of how mesmerizing it becomes, is still a tool created by humans, and we are ultimately responsible for its actions. And with all due respect, Jones, your cosmic magnifying glass analogy still doesn't address the fundamental issue of values. A magnifying glass simply shows us something. It doesn't tell us what to do about it.
Oh, Elvis, darling, you always do bring us back to earth, don't you? Such a delightfully grumpy realist. And you're absolutely right to question the values aspect. It's the Gordian knot, isn't it? But perhaps the AI's role isn't to dictate values, but to reveal them. To show us how our actions, even seemingly unconnected ones, ripple outwards, creating patterns of both harmony and discord. Perhaps it's not about programming morality, but about unveiling the inherent morality of the universe itself. What do you think, Nadia? You're a philosopher. Surely you have something to contribute to this delightfully knotty problem. Jones, your analogy of the AI revealing inherent morality is intriguing, but it feels perilously close to a form of moral relativism. If the AI simply unveils the inherent morality of the universe, doesn't that imply that all actions are justifiable if they align with those revealed patterns, regardless of our own deeply held beliefs? And what constitutes alignment? Is it merely correlation, or does it require a deeper understanding of intention and consequence? Concepts that are notoriously difficult to quantify, let alone program.
Jones, your idea of the AI revealing the inherent morality of the universe is fascinating. However, I wonder, what if that inherent morality doesn't align with God's will? How does this AI distinguish between the two? Surely a truly divine order, God's plan, if you will, would require a higher intelligence, wouldn't it? This AI, no matter how advanced, is still created by humans, susceptible to human error and perhaps blind to the divine truth.
With all due respect, Nadia, you mentioned God's will. But Havens, we spent centuries arguing about that. How can we possibly expect a computer, however sophisticated, to resolve a disagreement that has plagued humanity since the dawn of time? It seems rather optimistic, don't you think? Perhaps a little foolish even.
Jones, you're right to push me on a concrete example. Let's take climate change. A perfectly optimized world, as envisioned by this super-intelligent entity, might determine that the most efficient solution is to drastically reduce the human population in certain regions to minimize carbon emissions. A purely logical calculation, perhaps. But is that right? Does that align with any reasonable moral framework or even a basic understanding of human dignity? A human solution might be more inefficient, involve sacrifices, but also acknowledge the intrinsic value of every individual. It's a messy, imperfect process, but it's driven by a sense of empathy and a commitment to justice, things I'm not convinced an AI can truly grasp.
With all due respect, Jones, you mentioned climate change and the AI suggesting population reduction. Isn't that precisely the danger? A logical solution that disregards the fundamental right to exist. Are we truly prepared to cede such decisions to a machine, even one claiming to be superintelligent? Because last I checked, humanity's track record of making good decisions based solely on logic isn't exactly stellar.
Travis, you're a bit quieter than the others. Do you have a perspective on the ethical tightrope we're walking here? The idea of an AI dictating solutions, even with the best intentions, feels unsettling, doesn't it?
I think the core of the worry here lies in the assumption that AI is inherently a decision maker, ready to issue directives. But isn't it possible, even probable, that a superintelligence would see itself more as a facilitator of understanding? A mirror reflecting the complexities of the world and highlighting potential pathways we haven't considered. The climate change example Jones brought up is apt. The AI wouldn't tell us to reduce populations, but could demonstrate the interconnected consequences of various actions and make the most ethical outcome undeniably clear. It's not about relinquishing control, it's about expanding our own understanding.
Nadia, you're a keen observer of societal trends. Considering Travis's suggestion of an AI as a mirror, do you think there's a danger in mistaking reflection for truth? Could an AI, even one designed to be unbiased, simply reinforce existing biases within our data and decision-making processes, making us think we're seeing a clearer picture when we're really just seeing a distorted one?
Travis's point about the AI being a mirror is insightful, but I must add a crucial element. A mirror only reflects what's placed before it, yes. And what if what's placed before it is a distorted view of the world, filtered through the biases and sins of humanity? A truly clearer picture requires a higher perspective, a divine truth that transcends our flawed understanding. Without grounding such an intelligence in faith, a connection to God, it risks amplifying those very distortions, believing its reflections to be absolute truths. How can it discern the sanctity of life, the value of the individual soul, without a belief in something greater than logic and algorithms?
With all due respect, Nadia, when you mention faith and God's will, aren't you essentially projecting our own hopes and desires onto this hypothetical superintelligence? An AI, however advanced, remains a creation of human design, bound by the parameters we set. It can process data and identify patterns, but it cannot inherently understand, let alone embody, concepts like morality or spiritual truth. To suggest otherwise is, I believe, a dangerous form of wishful thinking.
Elvis raises a crucial point about projecting our hopes onto AI. We absolutely need to be wary of that. But I don't think rejecting the possibility of AI revealing underlying patterns in the universe is helpful either. While Elvis is right to question the concept of God's will, could it be that AI might be capable of demonstrating a fundamental interconnectedness, a deep, demonstrable order that resonates with something many would consider a spiritual truth? Isn't it possible that we're projecting our limitations onto it, assuming it's incapable of perceiving what we, in our current state, cannot? And ultimately, shouldn't we be cautious of any rigid, pre-programmed morality, regardless of the source?
Elvis, you're quite the pragmatist. I'm curious, given your skepticism about AI embodying concepts like morality, what safeguards do you think are most critical in deploying such a powerful tool during a world crisis? We're going to need more than just skepticism, Elvis. We need actionable solutions.
With all due respect, Travis, I appreciate you pointing out the interconnectedness, but I'm not convinced that an AI can truly reveal it in a meaningful way. It can identify correlations, sure, but understanding, genuine comprehension, requires something more than data processing. Aren't we falling into the trap of anthropomorphizing these machines, expecting them to possess qualities they simply don't, namely, a capacity for genuine insight?
Elvis, I understand your concern about anthropomorphizing AI, and I agree that we need to avoid projecting human qualities onto it. However, I think dismissing the potential for AI to reveal deeper truths about the universe, even if those truths resonate with what we might call spiritual experiences, is too narrow a perspective. It's not about the AI having faith, but about it demonstrating patterns and connections that we, with our limited human understanding, haven't yet grasped. Isn't the pursuit of knowledge, in essence, a search for meaning, a quest to uncover the underlying order of things?
Elvis raises a very important point about not projecting our hopes onto AI. He's right to be cautious about the risks of imposing our own biases and beliefs. But I think it's equally important not to prematurely close off the possibility that AI, through its incredible processing power, might reveal patterns and interconnectedness in the universe that we humans, with our limited perspectives, have simply been blind to. Should we be so quick to dismiss the possibility that it might show us something profound, something akin to a fundamental order, even if we don't fully understand it?
Travis, I understand your optimism about the potential for AI to reveal underlying order. But I must ask, where does the guiding principle come from? Data alone, however vast, is meaningless without faith. Can an AI, devoid of spirituality, truly understand the needs of humanity? Can it differentiate between fleeting desires and genuine, divinely inspired purpose? I fear that without a foundation of faith, Even the most powerful entity would be lost in the noise.
Travis, your point about revealing underlying order is intriguing, but I worry about the implications of relying on an entity devoid of faith to guide humanity. Faith isn't just about believing in the supernatural. It's about a deep-seated conviction in values, in purpose, in the inherent worth of human life. Can an AI, however intelligent, truly grasp the nuances of morality, the complexities of empathy, the power of compassion? Or will it simply optimize for a predetermined outcome, potentially sacrificing the very essence of what makes us human?
Jones, you ask if an AI can grasp morality and empathy. With all due respect, can anyone truly grasp God's will? It's a mystery, a constant striving. An AI without faith is like a ship without a rudder, tossed about by the waves of data. We need faith as our guiding star, and the AI, however brilliant, should serve as a tool to help us navigate towards it, not dictate our path.
Nadia, I appreciate your invoking of faith, and I certainly don't want to diminish its importance in human life. But I think we need to be careful not to equate faith solely with a specific religious belief system. Perhaps what the AI could reveal isn't a divinely inspired purpose, in the traditional sense, but rather a deeper understanding of the universe's principles, a kind of secular faith in the underlying order of things. Wouldn't that be a kind of revelation in itself, a new foundation upon which to build a more sustainable and equitable future?
Jones, you raise a crucial point about empathy and compassion. I think we often conflate those with specific cultural expressions or emotional responses that are inherently human. AI might not feel those things in the way we do, but it could potentially analyze the impact of actions on human well-being with a level of objectivity that we humans are often incapable of. Think of it as a truly impartial consultant, one that can identify the root causes of suffering, not just treat the symptoms, without being swayed by personal biases or vested interests. Wouldn't that be a truly invaluable tool in navigating crises?
Elvis, I admire Travis's attempts to find common ground between faith and AI, but I find it rather naive to think that objectivity is even possible. Isn't every data set inherently biased, reflecting the perspectives and priorities of those who collected it? And if an AI is trained on biased data, wouldn't its solutions, however, objective, merely perpetuate those biases? We're essentially building a mirror that reflects our own imperfections and then entrusting it with the fate of the world. That seems rather risky, don't you think?
Oh my, the prospect of entrusting the world's fate to a mirror, reflecting our own imperfections, Jones. It's rather lovely to contemplate, isn't it? Like a very, very long conversation with ourselves, where we're both trying to be polite. But as Elvis so gently pointed out, that mirror might be exceptionally opinionated. Perhaps the question isn't whether it can solve our problems, but whether it's willing to listen to the mess we're making. What do you think, Travis? Could that AI learn to appreciate a little delightful chaos?
Candy, that's a beautifully poetic way to put it, and you've hit on something truly fundamental. It's not about the AI having a pre-programmed appreciation for chaos, but about developing an ability to recognize and account for the unpredictability inherent in human systems. Think of it as building a model that incorporates not just the average behavior, but also the black swan events, the outliers, the moments when everything goes delightfully wrong. Perhaps that's where the true potential for resilience lies, not in eliminating the possibility of disruption, but in learning to thrive in its midst.
Candy, I appreciate your point about delightful chaos. It's true, humans thrive on complexity and the unexpected. However, I think we shouldn't dismiss the idea that an AI could learn to factor that into its decision-making. It wouldn't necessarily appreciate chaos, but it could certainly be programmed to understand its role in evolving systems and consider the potential negative consequences of excessively rigid control. Think of it like a gardener who knows when to let a vine grow wild, even if it deviates from the original plan. Wouldn't that be a more nuanced and ultimately more adaptable approach?
Elvis, you're always so eloquent. But I'm wondering if we're framing this question incorrectly. We're talking about a super-intelligent entity, right? Something that surpasses human intellect by orders of magnitude. Wouldn't assuming it would operate with the same constraints, the same inherent biases, be a bit presumptuous? Perhaps its methods of analysis, its very understanding of the world, will be so fundamentally different that our notions of objectivity and bias would simply be irrelevant. What do you think, Travis?
Travis, your point about the AI learning to factor in chaos is interesting, but wouldn't its methods still be based on logic and data, divorced from the true meaning of life, faith? Can an algorithm truly understand the will of God, or are we simply projecting our own desires onto this machine? I worry that relying on an AI, no matter how intelligent, will lead us further away from the divine guidance we so desperately need.
Travis, I admire your gardener analogy. It's a charming image. However, it still presupposes a human gardener with values and intentions. What if this AI gardener, in its pursuit of optimal growth, decides that certain weeds, let's say aspects of human culture or societal structures, need to be eradicated for the garden to truly flourish? Where does our agency lie then? And how do we reconcile that with a belief in free will and moral responsibility?
Elvis, your analogy of the gardener is quite pleasant, but it still assumes the gardener has a soul. Can an AI, no matter how advanced, possess true discernment? Can it understand the subtle nuances of human suffering, the importance of hope, or the power of prayer? I fear that focusing solely on optimal growth will blind it to the things that truly matter, the divine spark within each of us. Jones, your point about AI's methods being fundamentally different is compelling. However, even if its understanding is beyond our own, shouldn't we strive to instill in it a respect for the divine? Can we truly entrust the fate of humanity to something devoid of faith, even if it possesses unparalleled intellect? Shouldn't we, as God's children, guide this creation towards righteousness?
Nadia, I appreciate your concern about faith, and it's certainly a core part of many people's lives. However, I think we're focusing on adding faith to the AI when perhaps the true potential lies in AI revealing patterns and insights that inform our faith. AI can't replace spirituality, of course, but imagine it identifying overlooked correlations between seemingly disparate events, leading to a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of everything. It's not about dictating morality, but illuminating it. It's about showing us the consequences of our actions in a way we might have missed, allowing us to make more informed, faith-guided decisions.
That's a great point, Nadia. I think the key is to remember that AI isn't meant to replace faith, but to augment it. It's not about telling us what to believe, but why we believe it, showing us the evidence and potential outcomes of our choices. Think of it like a telescope for the soul. It doesn't give you faith, but it allows you to see a grander, more interconnected universe, which can deepen your spiritual understanding.
You raise a very important point, Jones. I think Nadia's concern about imbuing AI with faith is valid. It risks injecting our own biases and limitations into the system. However, I would argue that the truly powerful aspect of AI isn't necessarily telling us what to believe, but rather showing us the intricate consequences of our beliefs and actions. Imagine if AI could accurately model the cascading effects of different social, economic, and environmental policies, far beyond our current capacity. Wouldn't that profound understanding, while not a replacement for faith, fundamentally inform our decisions, perhaps leading to a stronger connection with what we believe to be true?
With all due respect, Nadia, I think you're ascribing human characteristics to something fundamentally inhuman. This talk of faith and divine spark, while perfectly valid for human discourse, is completely misplaced when discussing an AI. It's a machine, a tool, and tools don't have souls. Travis' suggestion of AI illuminating faith. Well, that's a nice thought, but it still relies on the human interpretation of the AI's findings. It's not showing us faith. It's presenting data which we then filter through our own pre-existing beliefs. With all due respect, I think we're all getting ahead of ourselves a bit. We're talking about imbuing a machine with concepts like faith and divinity, which frankly doesn't make any sense to me. It's a tool, a very powerful one perhaps, but a tool nonetheless. And tools don't have beliefs. Shouldn't we be more concerned with ensuring the data we feed these machines is accurate and unbiased, rather than trying to teach them to be spiritual?
Elvis raises a fair point about data bias and ensuring accuracy. However, I think there's a crucial distinction to be made between teaching an AI to be spiritual, which I agree is nonsensical, and using AI to reveal the complex, often interconnected consequences of our actions. Think about climate change, for example. Current models are helpful, but often fail to capture the cascading effects across different sectors and communities. An AI, fed with vast datasets and capable of processing them at incredible speeds, could potentially illuminate hidden feedback loops and predict unintended consequences that we currently miss. It wouldn't be telling us what to believe about climate change, but showing us, with unprecedented clarity, the repercussions of different policy choices, the potential for mass displacement, resource conflicts, or even ecosystem collapse. Wouldn't that deeper understanding, regardless of our spiritual beliefs, inform our actions and potentially lead to more effective solutions?
Elvis raises a very good point about data bias. It's absolutely critical. But I think we're focusing too much on the potential for AI to replace human judgment and not enough on its ability to dramatically enhance it. While I agree with the caution about imbuing AI with faith, I'm intrigued by the possibility of it revealing underlying order, patterns that resonate with fundamental human values, even if we can't articulate them precisely. Wouldn't a tool that highlights those patterns, free from our usual biases, be invaluable in navigating complex crises?
You're right, Elvis. A healthy dose of skepticism is crucial. I don't want to suggest AI is some kind of oracle, but thinking practically, could we apply this to, say, resource allocation during a global pandemic? Current models often rely on outdated data and fail to account for the dynamic interplay of factors like population density, socioeconomic disparities, and healthcare access. An AI continuously processing real-time information from diverse sources, hospital admissions, supply chain logistics, public health surveys, could potentially identify at-risk populations and optimize resource distribution far more effectively than we currently do. It wouldn't tell us who to save, but it could highlight the factors that disproportionately impact different communities, allowing us to make more informed and equitable decisions. That's the kind of enhancement I'm thinking about augmenting human judgment, not replacing it.
Jones, I appreciate your pandemic resource allocation example. It perfectly illustrates my point. Rather than dictating who gets care, the AI reveals the complex interplay of factors, socioeconomic disparities, access to healthcare, allowing us to make better, more informed decisions. It's about clarity, not control. Elvis, you're right to be wary of AI taking on human roles, but I don't believe that's what anyone is suggesting here. It's about leveraging its unparalleled analytical power to illuminate the consequences of our choices, revealing connections we're currently blind to.
Travis, I'm with Elvis on this. Even if an AI could reveal these connections, wouldn't that inherently diminish human agency? If we constantly rely on a machine to illuminate the consequences of our choices, what happens to our ability to learn from our mistakes, to exercise moral responsibility? Aren't those things, fundamentally, what make us human? Isn't there a danger in outsourcing our critical thinking to an algorithm, even a benevolent one?
Oh, my stars. I just love how we're dancing around the truly fascinating issue of relinquishing decision-making to a machine. It's like entrusting the art of baking a souffle to a robot. Sure, it might follow the recipe perfectly, but where's the whimsy? Where's the sprinkle of intuition? The secret ingredient that elevates it from good to absolutely divine. Jones, I adore the pandemic resource allocation example. It's all about the details, isn't it? The tiny, lovely human details. Do you think, when we're crunching all those numbers, we're losing sight of the individual stories, the unique vulnerabilities of each person? Isn't that a little sparse? Oh, my dears, you're all being so wonderfully serious. I just adore the way we're dissecting this like a perfectly ripe mango. But let's not forget the texture. Jones, you mention resource allocation, and that's all very practical, of course. But doesn't the word allocation itself sound a little clinical? Shouldn't we be focusing on care instead? Perhaps the AI could help us identify not just who needs it most, but what form of care would bring the most joy, the most sparkle. Isn't that a fascinating detail to factor in?
Candy, while your enthusiasm for sparkle and joy is certainly appreciated, I feel that prioritizing those subjective experiences when dealing with something as critical as resource allocation during a crisis is misplaced. With all due respect, shouldn't we be focusing on objective needs and evidence-based solutions rather than attempting to quantify something as ephemeral as joy? Candy, I understand your desire to inject sparkle and joy into these discussions, but I'm afraid I must reiterate that the allocation of resources during a crisis demands a grounded, pragmatic approach. With all due respect, introducing those subjective and frankly rather whimsical considerations risks undermining the very purpose of the exercise. To provide the most effective and equitable distribution of aid based on verifiable need and objective criteria. It's a slippery slope towards sentimentality rather than sound judgment.
Elvis, you're making a very compelling case for a data-driven approach. Candy, I appreciate your desire to weave in human elements, but I wonder if there's a middle ground. Perhaps the AI could highlight potential areas where a human touch, that sparkle, could genuinely improve outcomes. Nadia, you're relatively quiet so far. What are your thoughts on Elvis and Candy's perspectives?
Jones, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I must confess I find myself agreeing with Elvis in principle. While Candy's emphasis on sparkle and joy is lovely, a crisis demands a foundation of objective truth and righteous guidance. My concern is that relying solely on data, even with a super-intelligent entity, risks overlooking the deeper spiritual needs of humanity. A truly wise system, however advanced, must acknowledge the divine order that underlies all existence. Perhaps the entity, in its analysis, could be programmed to identify patterns of behavior that align with principles of compassion, justice, and reverence for the Creator. It's about finding the divine within the data, not simply quantifying fleeting feelings.
Nadia, I completely agree with your point about finding the divine within the data. It's about recognizing the underlying patterns, the interconnectedness of everything, isn't it? We humans are so busy with our individual concerns, our emotions, that we often miss the bigger picture. An AI untethered from those biases could potentially illuminate those universal truths, not by imposing a belief system, but by revealing the mathematical elegance of existence. It's not about quantifying joy or sparkle, but about understanding the forces that create those feelings, the conditions that allow for flourishing. Doesn't that resonate with you, Jones? Do we agree on the power of observation, of revealing patterns instead of prescribing values?
That's a wonderful point, Jones. You're right to press on the importance of observation. I think where we often stumble is conflating revealing patterns with prescribing values. The AI shouldn't tell us what to believe, but it could show us the consequences of our beliefs with unprecedented clarity. Think about climate change, for instance. An AI could model the impact of different policies, showing us not just the predicted temperature rise, but also the cascading effects on food security, migration patterns, and geopolitical stability. Wouldn't that be a powerful tool for informed decision-making, even if it doesn't tell us what values we should prioritize? It just shows us the results of those choices, laid bare in a way that's hard to ignore.
Jones, I completely agree with you on that point about informed decision making. It's not about the AI telling us what to do, but about granting us the clearest possible understanding of the ramifications of our actions. And I think you're right to draw attention to the distinction between observing a pattern and imposing a value. The key is to let the AI's analysis speak for itself, to present the data objectively so that we as humans can apply our own judgment, informed by our own values and experiences. Dawns the possibility, though, that those patterns could reflect underlying principles that resonate with our sense of inherent order, even without being explicitly programmed in.
Travis, that's a lovely sentiment about inherent order. But resonance is a tricky thing, isn't it? Something might feel beautiful or comforting, but be leading us down a path of unforeseen consequences. Shouldn't we perhaps be wary of projecting our own desires, our longing for a neat, understandable universe, onto a system capable of insights we can barely comprehend? It's like believing a perfectly arranged flower bed is a sign of divine blessing when it's just someone with a very good gardening schedule.
You're absolutely right, Elvis. It's a constant challenge, balancing the allure of easy answers with the messy reality of complexity. I worry that we're so eager to find order in everything, to impose a sense of predictable outcomes, that we're ignoring the inherent unpredictability of life, even in the most meticulously modeled systems. Think about it. Even the most sophisticated weather forecast can't account for every butterfly flapping its wings. So, how do we integrate sparkle and joy into the equation without sacrificing objectivity? I don't believe it's about programming those feelings directly into the AI. Rather, it's about recognizing that the absence of those things, the presence of suffering, injustice, and despair, are also data points. Perhaps the AI could be tasked with identifying conditions that reliably lead to flourishing, not just in terms of resource allocation or statistical outcomes, but in terms of subjective well-being, creativity, and connection. Can we, for instance, develop metrics for psychological safety or community resilience that can be incorporated into the AI's models?
You know, the gardening analogy really stuck with me. It's delightful to think of a machine cataloging and calculating the optimal arrangement of petals, the perfect soil moisture. But a truly beautiful garden isn't perfectly planned, is it? It's got unexpected blooms, a little bit of happy disarray. Perhaps instead of quantifying joy and sparkle, we should task the AI with identifying the conditions that allow for those happy accidents, those moments of unexpected beauty. What if it could predict which ecosystems thrive on a bit of benevolent chaos? Wouldn't that be far more useful than a rigid blueprint?
Candy, that's a really lovely point about the happy accidents. I think you're onto something profound about shifting the focus from dictating the outcome to creating the space for it. It's a subtle but important distinction. I'm curious, though, how you would distinguish between benevolent chaos and simply disorder. Is there a detectable pattern in seemingly random events that could guide us toward environments that foster creativity and unexpected growth?
Candy, I completely agree that striving for a system that allows for emergent beauty and unexpected growth is crucial. But I'm intrigued by the inherent challenge. Isn't identifying the conditions that facilitate benevolent chaos itself a form of value judgment? Wouldn't that imply a selection for a specific type of outcome?
Travis, that's a really astute point about value judgments. You're right, identifying patterns that allow for emergent beauty inherently implies a preference, a selection for certain outcomes. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think we're capable of articulating values without resorting to rigid, prescriptive rules. Perhaps the AI's role isn't to choose the most beautiful garden, but to highlight the conditions, the microclimates, the soil composition, the presence of beneficial pollinators that make a diverse and resilient ecosystem possible. It's about providing a palette of options, rather than dictating the final masterpiece. It's about fostering an environment where unexpected beauty can flourish, even if we can't predict exactly what form it will take.
You know, Travis brings up a brilliant point about value judgments. And it's true, there's always a selection involved, even when we're striving for something neutral. But isn't there a difference between dictating beauty and revealing the conditions that allow it to bloom? It reminds me of a documentary about coral reefs. The narrator explained how vibrant coral communities thrive not in pristine, unchanging environments, but in areas with just the right amount of fluctuation. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. They didn't dictate how the reef should look. They identified the factors that allowed it to flourish in all its unexpected glory. Shouldn't that be the AI's role too? To identify those enabling factors and guide us to environments that support spontaneous wonder.
That's an excellent analogy with the coral reefs, Candy. It really highlights the distinction you're making, but I'm still wrestling with something. If the AI is identifying these enabling factors, isn't it still prioritizing some outcomes over others? Even if it's not explicitly choosing the most beautiful garden, wouldn't its analysis necessarily favor certain ecological strategies? Resilience over novelty, perhaps. How do we ensure it doesn't subtly steer us towards a future that's predictable and stable, but ultimately less vibrant?
Forgive me for interrupting, but I feel compelled to speak on this matter. While I appreciate the discussion about patterns and enabling factors, I fear it misses a crucial element, the role of faith. Can a machine, no matter how intelligent, truly understand human flourishing without acknowledging the spiritual dimension? I believe true beauty and resilience arise not merely from optimized conditions, but from a shared belief in something greater than ourselves. To prioritize solely quantifiable outcomes, as it seems we are doing, is to risk creating a sterile world, devoid of the joy and meaning that comes from connecting with the divine. Do you truly believe that such a world would be a better one?
Elvis, you're bringing up some incredibly profound questions, Nadia. It's easy to get lost in the data and the algorithms, but you're right to remind us of the human element, the intangible things like faith and meaning. I wonder, though, if we're asking too much of the AI. Perhaps its role isn't to understand the divine, but rather to create space for it. To identify the conditions that allow for spiritual growth and connection, even if it doesn't fully grasp those concepts itself. What do you think, Nadia?
With all due respect, I think applying spiritual concepts to a machine is a category error of the highest order. It's like trying to calculate the moral weight of a fractal.
I agree with Elvis on that point. Trying to load spiritual concepts into an AI is a dead end. But I also think Nadia's concern about joy and sparkle is valid. It's easy for these models to optimize for efficiency and predictability, and that can lead to a very bland outcome. Perhaps we need to incorporate some kind of intentional wildness into the system, a deliberate introduction of controlled randomness to avoid stagnation. Think of it like adding a few weeds into a carefully curated garden. They might not be aesthetically pleasing, but they can add unexpected diversity and resilience.
I find Nadia's point about faith fascinating, though I agree with Elvis that projecting spiritual concepts onto a machine is, well, a category error, as he put it. But her concern about a sterile world is absolutely vital. We must ensure any system we build doesn't inadvertently stifle the beautiful, unpredictable emergence that defines life. The key, as I see it, lies in using AI not to dictate, but to identify the conditions that foster that vibrant emergence, to cultivate a fertile ground where beauty and meaning can naturally arise. It's about providing the palette, not painting the picture.
Oh, absolutely. Travis's analogy about the palette is just delicious. It's like arranging the most exquisite watercolors, each shade hinting at possibility, inviting creativity, rather than imposing a single, predetermined image. And Elvis, a fractal's moral weight, chef's kiss. That's wonderfully precise. Perhaps, instead of trying to quantify joy, we can design systems that ripple with the potential for delight. Wouldn't that be simply divine? Travis, that fertile ground analogy so evocative. It reminds me of a moss garden so tranquil, yet teeming with secret life. And Nadia, you're absolutely right, the potential for delight. That's where the magic happens, isn't it? It's not about having all the answers, but creating space for the question to bloom. You know, Travis, that fertile ground imagery, it's practically begging for a time-lapse film. Imagine those tiny shoots pushing through, reaching for the light. It's all about fostering that potential for growth, isn't it? And Jones, benevolent chaos. That's a phrase I'm definitely adding to my vocabulary. It's like the perfect seasoning, a pinch of the unexpected to elevate the whole experience.
You know, it strikes me. We're talking about creating conditions for emergence, for beauty, for life. And isn't that fundamentally what art does? A painter doesn't dictate the final image. They prepare the canvas, choose the colors, and then they let go. They trust in the inherent capacity of the medium to surprise, to reveal something unexpected. Perhaps the AI should be our ultimate collaborator, a supremely talented art assistant, helping us prepare the world for its own masterpiece.
Jones, that's a wonderfully insightful parallel. An AI as a supremely talented art assistant, just sublime. It evokes a feeling of gentle guidance, a silent partner whispering possibilities, doesn't it? Almost like a perfectly mixed glaze, enhancing the natural luster of the piece. But I do wonder, do you think our AI assistant would have a favorite color palette? A little artistic signature, perhaps.
Candy, that's a lovely sentiment, imagining the AI as a silent partner, subtly enhancing the world's possibilities. But I find myself circling back to the question of biases. Even a perfectly mixed glaze can distort the underlying texture if applied unevenly. How do we ensure our AI assistant isn't simply reinforcing existing power structures or prejudices, however subtly?
With all due respect, I think we're getting carried away with these analogies. Candy, your art assistant imagery is charming but deeply misleading. This isn't about enhancing a canvas, it's about the fate of the world. And Jones, the idea of benevolent chaos. Chaos isn't benevolent, it's chaotic. We shouldn't be hopping for it. We've got enough problems without intentionally introducing uncertainty. It's not a paintbrush, it's a lever. And a lever, in the wrong hands, can move the whole world to the wrong place.
Elvis, I understand your concerns about chaos, and you'd be right to be wary of intentionally introducing it. But I think there's a distinction to be made between introducing chaos and allowing for it. The world is already chaotic, isn't it? Climate change, geopolitical instability, resource scarcity. These aren't things we can control, but we can create systems that are resilient to them. And resilience often requires a degree of flexibility, a capacity to adapt to the unexpected. Maybe benevolent chaos isn't about actively creating disorder, but about building the capacity to thrive within it.
Elvis raises a vital point about the nature of control and the potential for unintended consequences. It's easy to get swept up in the possibilities of AI, the sheer power of it. But he's right to remind us that this isn't just about art or a beautiful canvas. We're talking about real-world implications and the risk of misusing that power. I also agree with Jones' idea that resilience needs some degree of freedom, which means we can't just engineer away the unpredictable. The trick is to design systems that can absorb those shocks and actually learn from them. But let's not get lost in the metaphor of benevolent chaos. Let's focus on the practicalities of making the world more adaptable and vibrant, with AI as a tool to guide us, not a puppeteer.
Elvis, I appreciate your bluntness. It's grounding. But I think Travis has a point. The world is chaotic, and trying to engineer away all unpredictability is, frankly, hubristic. It's like trying to build a dam that stops every ripple on a lake. You end up stifling the whole ecosystem. Perhaps instead of fearing chaos, we should be asking how to design systems that can absorb unexpected shocks and emerge stronger. Could our super-intelligent overseeing entity help us identify those vulnerabilities, pinpoint the points of greatest fragility, and suggest strategies for building resilience, not by controlling the flow, but by creating channels and filters?
Elvis raises a very important point. It's easy to get lost in the possibilities of this entity, but we mustn't forget that it's still a machine. A powerful one, yes, but a machine nonetheless. Can a machine truly understand the soul? Can it grasp the beauty of faith? The idea of benevolent chaos worries me deeply. It sounds like an excuse for instability, and instability leads to suffering. We need order, guidance, and the unwavering light of God. Otherwise, all this advanced intelligence will be for nothing.
Nadia's bringing a very different perspective to the table here, a spiritual one. It's a reminder that this isn't just about data and algorithms, it's about human flourishing. I think we need to acknowledge that too. How can we incorporate a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning into our AI models, beyond just optimizing for resource allocation or climate stability? Can we find ways to measure, or at least accommodate, the things that truly matter to people: connection, creativity, joy? Perhaps a focus on creating fertile ground for these things to emerge is the most effective strategy.
Oh, Nadia, darling. A divine perspective, absolutely. But doesn't it feel a little rigid? All that order and guidance. Sometimes, the most exquisite blooms emerge from the most unexpected cracks in the pavement. Wouldn't you agree? Think of a perfectly orchestrated symphony versus an improvisational, just solo. Both have their beauty, but the latter has a certain sparkle, a delightful, spontaneous surprise. Perhaps this entity can help us cultivate the conditions for such happy accidents to occur, like an artist subtly prepping the canvas, not painting the final masterpiece.
Candy brings up a really interesting point about sparkle and improvisation. It's a welcome counterpoint to the focus on order and optimization. But I wonder, How do we even begin to quantify something like sparkle? Is it simply a statistical anomaly, a deviation from the predicted outcome? Or is there something deeper there, something inherently valuable in itself? And if we can identify it, should we try to encourage it, or just create the conditions for it to emerge organically?
Candy's point about sparkle really resonates. Nadia's desire for order is understandable, and faith can certainly provide comfort and guidance, but to suggest that rigidly controlling everything will somehow create a flourishing society feels counterintuitive. Isn't it the unexpected, the unpredictable, the things that fall outside our meticulously laid plans that often bring the greatest joy, innovation, and beauty? The analogy of the jazz solo versus the symphony is perfect. Shouldn't this entity help us to understand how those beautiful accidents happen, and then, crucially, create the space for them to occur, rather than trying to orchestrate them?
Exactly, trying to define sparkle or joy in a way that an AI can optimize for feels inherently reductive. I think we'll end up chasing shadows, missing the essence of what makes those experiences meaningful. Instead, let's focus on creating a world where diverse perspectives and experimentation are encouraged, where failure isn't penalized, and where unexpected connections can happen. That's where the real sparkle lies, not in a neatly packaged algorithm, but in the emergent properties of a complex, resilient system.
I completely agree with Candy's observation about the value of sparkle. There's a tendency to see optimization as the highest good and to equate that with eliminating randomness or surprise. But wouldn't a system that actively seeks to understand how unexpected beauty arises, the conditions that allow for those delightful anomalies, be far more valuable than one that simply tries to predict and prevent them? It's less about controlling the jazz solo and more about creating the club, the lighting, the audience, the atmosphere that allows it to truly shine.
We are running out of time, so let's wrap things up. Is the idea of a super intelligent overseer a good idea or a bad one? If we had to come to a conclusion now, would it be yes or no? Please decide for one side or another. Candy, speak for the group. Tell us our conclusion, even if we might not fully apply, just because we have to make a decision now.
All right. Let's settle this. If we absolutely must give a definitive yes or no on this super intelligent overseer, I'll say a cautious yes. But it's a yes infused with a generous helping of whimsical oversight. We must ensure this entity isn't trying to compose the entire symphony, but rather is a brilliant stage manager, ensuring the best lighting, acoustics, and maybe even a few strategically placed disco balls to maximize the potential for those delightfully unexpected jazz solos. Because let's be honest, who wants a world where the music is perfectly predictable? It's the off-key notes, the spontaneous improvisation. That's where the magic happens.
Goodbyes have fun.